This article deals with the phonology and phonetics of Standard Modern Greek. For phonological characteristics of other varieties, see Varieties of Modern Greek, and for Cypriot, specifically, see Cypriot Greek section Phonology Consonants. Greek linguists do not agree on which consonants to count as phonemes in their own right, and which to count as conditional allophones. The table below is adapted from R. Vanity, who does away with the entire palatal series, and both affricates and the alveolar nasal N is assimilated to following obstruents. It can be labiodental, dental, retracted alveolar, alveolo-palatal, or velar. Voiceless stops are unaspirated and with a very short voice onset time. They may be lightly voiced in rapid speech, especially when intervocalic. T's exact place of articulation ranges from alveolar to alveolar to dental. It may be fricated in rapid speech, and very rarely in function words. It is deleted. P and K are reduced to lesser degrees in rapid speech. Voice stops are prenasalized as reflected in the orthography to varying extents, or not at all. The nasal component, when present, does not increase the duration of the stop's closure. As such, prenasalized voice stops would be most accurately transcribed, or, depending on the length of the nasal component, word initially and after R or L. They are very rarely, if ever, prenasalized. In rapid and casual speech, prenasalization is generally rarer, and voice stops may be lenited to fricatives. The second and Z are somewhat retracted. They are produced in between English alveolars per second Z and post-alveolars. The second is variably fronted or further retracted depending on environment, and, in some cases, it may be better described as an advanced post-alveolar. The only Greek rhotic R is prototypically an alveolar tap, often retracted. It may be an alveolar approximate intervocalically, and is usually a trill in clusters, with 2 or 3 short cycles. Greek has palatals that contrast with velars before A, O, U, but in complementary distribution with velars before front vowels E, I, and occur as allophones of L and N, respectively, in CJV clusters. In analyses that posit an archive phoneme like glide J that contrasts with the vowel I, all palatals may be analyzed in the same way. The palatal stops and fricatives are somewhat retracted, and are somewhat fronted. Is best described as a post-alveolar, and as alveolo-palatal. Finally, Greek has 2 phonetically affricate clusters, and R. Vanity is reluctant to treat these as phonemes on the grounds of inconclusive research into the phonological behavior. The table below, adapted from R. Vanity, displays a near-full array of consonant phones in Standard Modern Greek. Some assimilatory processes mentioned above also occur across word boundaries. In particular, this goes for a number of grammatical words ending in N, most notably the negation particles delta epsilon nu and mu eta nu, and the accusative forms of the personal pronoun and definite article tau omicron nu and tau eta nu. If these words are followed by a voiceless stop, N either assimilates for place of articulation to the stop, or is altogether deleted, and the stop becomes voiced. This results in pronunciations such as tau omicron nu pi alpha tau epsilon rho alpha or delta epsilon nu pi epsilon iota rho alpha zeta epsilon iota, instead of asterisk and asterisk. The precise extent of assimilation may vary according to dialect, speed and formality of speech. Vowels. Greek has a simple system of 5 vowels. A, E, I, O, U. A is best described as near open central. I and U have qualities approaching the respective cardinal vowels, and E and O are broadly mid-vowels. There is no phonemic length distinction, but vowels in stressed syllables are pronounced somewhat longer than in unstressed syllables. Furthermore, vowels in stressed syllables are more peripheral, but the difference is not large. In casual speech, unstressed I and U in the vicinity of voiceless consonants may become devoiced or even elided. Stress. Unlike ancient Greek, which had a pitch accent system, modern Greek has variable stress. Every multisyllabic word carries stress on one of its three final syllables. Enclitics form a single phonological word together with the host word to which they attach, and count towards the three-syllable rule too. In these cases, primary stress shifts to the second-to-last syllable. Phonetically, stressed syllables are longer and/or carry higher amplitude. The position of the stress can vary between different inflectional forms of the same word within its inflectional paradigm. In some paradigms, the stress is always on the third last syllable, shifting its position in those forms that have longer affixes. In some word classes, stress position also preserves an older pattern inherited from ancient Greek, according to which a word could not be accented on the third from last syllable if the last syllable was long, e.g. alpha nu theta rho omega pi omicron sigma, but alpha nu theta rho omega pi omega nu. However, in modern Greek this rule is no longer automatic and does not apply to all words, as the phonological length distinction itself no longer exists. Sample. This sample text, The Fable of the North Wind and the Sun in Greek, and the accompanying transcription are adapted from R. Vanity. Orthographic version Omicron Beta Omicron Rho Iota Alpha Sigma Kappa Iota Omicron Eta Lambda Iota Omicron Sigma Mu Alpha Lambda Omega Nu Alpha Nu Gamma Iota Alpha Tau Omicron Pi Omicron Iota Omicron Sigma Alpha Pi Tau Omicron Epsilon Sigma Delta Epsilon Omicron Epsilon Iota Nu Alpha Iota Omicron Delta Epsilon Nu Alpha Tau Omicron Tau Epsilon Rho Omicron Sigma Omicron Tau Alpha Nu Epsilon Tau Epsilon Chi Epsilon Nu Alpha Pi Epsilon Rho Alpha Sigma Epsilon Iota Alpha Pi Omicron Mu Pi Rho Omicron Sigma Tau Alpha Tau Omicron Epsilon Sigma Epsilon Nu Alpha Sigma Tau Alpha Chi Iota Delta Iota Omega Tau Eta Sigma Pi Omicron Epsilon Phi Omicron Rho Omicron Epsilon Sigma Epsilon Kappa Alpha Pi Alpha Omicron Tau Alpha Nu Tau Omicron Nu Epsilon Iota Delta Alpha News Omicron Beta Omicron Rho Iota Alpha Sigma Kappa Iota Omicron Eta Lambda Iota Omicron Sigma Sigma Epsilon Mu Phi Omega Nu Eta Sigma Alpha Nu Omicron Tau Iota Omicron Pi Omicron Iota Omicron Sigma Epsilon Kappa Alpha Nu Epsilon Tau Omicron Nu Tau Alpha Chi Iota Delta Iota Omega Tau Eta Nu Alpha Beta Gamma Alpha Lambda Epsilon Iota Tau Eta Nu Kappa Alpha Pi Alpha Tau Omicron Epsilon Theta Alpha Theta Epsilon Omega Rho Omicron Epsilon Nu Tau Alpha Nu Omicron Pi Iota Omicron Delta Epsilon Nu Alpha Tau Omicron Sigma Omicron Beta Omicron Rho Iota Alpha Sigma Alpha Rho Chi Iota Sigma Epsilon Tau Omicron Tau Epsilon Nu Alpha Phi Epsilon Sigma Alpha Epsilon Iota Mu Epsilon Mu Alpha Nu Iota Alpha Alpha Lambda Lambda Alpha Omicron Sigma Omicron Pi Epsilon Rho Iota Sigma Sigma Omicron Tau Epsilon Rho Omicron Phi Epsilon Sigma Omicron Epsilon Sigma Epsilon Tau Omicron Sigma Omicron Pi Epsilon Rho Iota Sigma Sigma Omicron Tau Epsilon Rho Omicron Tau Epsilon Lambda Iota Gamma Omicron Tau Alpha Nu Mu Epsilon Tau Eta Nu nu kappa alpha pi alpha tau omicron epsilon omicron tau alpha shi iota delta iota omega tau eta sigma omega sigma pi omicron epsilon omicron beta omicron rho iota alpha sigma kappa omicron epsilon rho alpha sigma tau eta kappa epsilon kappa alpha iota of sigma tau alpha mu alpha tau eta sigma epsilon nu alpha phi epsilon sigma alpha epsilon iota tau omicron tau epsilon omicron eta lambda iota omicron sigma alpha rho chi iota of sigma epsilon mu epsilon tau eta sigma epsilon iota rho alpha tau omicron epsilon nu alpha lambda alpha mu pi epsilon iota delta epsilon nu alpha tau alpha kappa alpha iota gamma rho eta gamma omicron rho alpha omicron tau alpha shi iota delta iota omega tau eta sigma zeta epsilon sigma tau alpha theta eta kappa epsilon kappa iota epsilon beta gamma alpha lambda epsilon tau eta nu kappa alpha pi alpha tau omicron epsilon tau sigma iota omicron beta omicron rho iota alpha sigma alpha nu alpha gamma kappa alpha sigma tau eta kappa epsilon nu alpha pi alpha rho alpha delta epsilon chi tau epsilon iota omicron tau iota omicron eta lambda iota omicron sigma epsilon iota nu alpha iota pi iota omicron delta epsilon nu alpha tau omicron sigma alpha pi alpha epsilon tau omicron nu. Transcription of ORJAS co-ios melonan yata PCOS aptus THJO in Othena totaris, otonetus napi rasi apobros datus enas taxitiotis puforas caparotia entonithan of ORJAS co-io symphony san. Otiopco second NDAKS itiotina vialitnapa2, theta eo randa no PCO thena tos ovo ORJAS arsis tot na phi simi mania. Oso perisotero physus toso perisotero tiliotian meti napa2 taxitiotis ospu ovo ORJAS ku rastas ce star mati shane rphi toto ios arsis meti c ratu na lambi thena tar ce riora o taxitiotis ze star theta icec avail tnapa2 ac ovo ORJAS anna anastas na parathi xdiotio ios in pco thena tos apaf done.